This week's topic is one of the most used coping mechanisms for PMDD and PME, and that is isolating. That is separating ourselves from others and sort of waiting out the most intense window of those PMDD flares. And I want to kind of break down why we choose isolation when it's actually more harmful than helpful for us. And also, what are more proactive, more productive, more effective ways for us to seek intimacy and connection and emotional support. So first I want to talk about why does isolation seem like a good idea? So in our, especially Western culture and society, we are indoctrinated with toxic positivity. So any emotion or expression that is remotely negative is seen as a problem and seen as something to fix. You may have also been dismissed around this as these feelings are a weakness, that it's almost like a character flaw or a moral failing to experience negative emotions. And so over time, we internalize this about ourselves. We believe that we're a problem, that we're a burden, that there's something wrong with us because we're having these feelings. And then even more so if we feel like we can't control them and act in a socially acceptable way when we're having those feelings. And we also get that message over and over and over from other people, right? To just deal with it, to get over it, to just choose to feel different, choose to feel better. And a lot of times the people that we're hearing this from are our partners, and a lot of times they're men, and men have been more so socialized to repress all emotions, right? So for them, the fact that the experience is even present can be so foreign and feel like it's something that oh, they're so good at handling emotions because they don't feel them, which is not actually being good at handling emotions or self-regulation. It's suppression, right? So when we're in this dynamic where we feel flawed and other people are telling us we're flawed, and then because our nervous systems are more sensitive and don't stick with this narrative that we put on the mask and we put on the face and everything's fine and we power through, our nervous system gets a little haywire and is like, no, this isn't okay. We have big feelings and they're coming out. Whether you do that in a proactive, healthy way or not, they're going to find a way to be voiced and to be seen and to be heard. So when you're in that boat and you're thinking well, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to control the emotions. I don't know how to control the behavior. And you've probably tried so often to seek support from people closest to you, family, friends, partners, and found that others couldn't fix you either. And so then we think that okay, well, I care about these people and I don't want to hurt them. I also don't want to be in these situations where I'm being hurt by them because they continue to dismiss my experience. So the solution is isolate. Go into your own separate space and wait it out, right? And so we say things like, oh no, I just want to be alone, or I need to be alone, or sometimes more self-deprecating and say oh, you don't want to be around me when I'm like this or at this time. And so we create this dynamic that also tells the people in our life that the best thing you can do for me is leave me alone. But there's so much research that shows us that isolation is so detrimental to us as humans, that our physical and mental health is greatly negatively impacted because we are designed to be in community and to be in connection with others. So why does our brain and body tell us that isolating is the way to go, right? Underneath these requests and this solution to hide away from the world is a belief that you're unlovable, that we're unlovable when we act out in these ways, that there's something wrong with us, we're broken, we're a burden. And what we need most in that time, what we most want and what we crave is intimacy and connection, but we find ourselves trying to grasp at that connection through lashing out, through creating demands or putting pressure on things or picking fights. And really at the core, it's we're trying to throw out a lifeline. But if we don't believe that we're lovable and we're worthy of connection and that we are worthy of being like having space held for us, it seems better to just hide until we can perform and we can put the face back on, we can power through again, we can, act in what's considered a socially acceptable way. So the question becomes like, how do we shift this pattern? How do we actually go about seeking connection in a healthy and proactive way that isn't pushing people away from us? It isn't hurting other people. It isn't crossing their boundaries, but is also owning that you are worthy of asking for support. You're going through something that's really difficult. And the way to heal that is not to isolate and push all of your community away, but to actually create those connections. So first I want to talk to you about you, right? So having community support, having, a network of people that you can reach out to and can kind of step in to co-regulate when they're available is so important. But also, when you've been isolating for so long, often those people are not there, whether because they've stepped away because they couldn't deal with it and they didn't have the tolerance, they didn't have the regulation tools to hold space for you, or because after years and years of pushing people away, they've stopped asking, they've stopped checking in, right? So we want to start with, what can you do for yourself? What do you have control over? And what you always have control over is connecting with yourself. You can provide connection with yourself. You can spend time with yourself. And this is a practice in coming back to the body and being mindful, right? So this can be journaling, this can be doing an EFT practice, this can be doing yoga, like where your intention is, I'm going to sync my breath and my body, I'm going to be present in this moment. Somatic movement, things like this that just connect to being in your own presence, and validating that that presence doesn't always have to be fun and excited and like these versions of ourselves that are kind of considered the better versions, right? The ones that we get the most positive feedback about. But taking time to spend time with yourself, even when you're not this perfect version, when you're not the idealized version, or the most socially accepted version of yourself, because this sends your body signals that you are worthy of time and attention and care, even when your emotions are low, even when you feel depressed or hopeless or angry or any of these things, right? It can also be really simple things like preparing a meal for yourself and eating mindfully, or washing your face, or doing a hair mask, like doing something a little bit extra, in terms of self-care, and trying to be as present for that experience as you possibly can. And this takes time to feel safe doing that. It takes time to feel safe being in your body. But the practice of doing that, even just a little bit, even if it's just like, I'm going to be present with the sensation of brushing my teeth, or I'm going to be present with the sensation of washing my face, something like that, just that practice is going to go so far in training your nervous system to feel worthy of time and attention and care, even when you don't feel your best. And this then can be taken as a intention that you bring into social settings as well, is this idea that what if you didn't have to show up in some predetermined way? What if you didn't have to be the life of the party, or you didn't have to be whatever, version you've tended to present to the world? And so essentially giving yourself permission to drop the mask, because what ends up happening is we use up so much energy and regulatory resources trying to suppress our experience. And the more we suppress that, the more likely it is to come out in ways that we're not proud of, in uncontrollable ways, right? So if we're constantly trying to be like, okay, don't let them see that I'm sad, don't let them see that I'm angry, so much energy is going to trying to suppress that we aren't present, we aren't actually getting the connection. And it reinforces this story that like, I might as well isolate because when I'm with people, I don't feel connected anyway. I don't know if you've had that experience, but I lived for years being like, I don't know if I'm so introverted, like I don't even know if I like community settings, like one-on-one is fine, but like I don't know if that's even for me, because I so often had the experience where I would be in a room with a ton of people and feel so alone, Like I just couldn't feel connected to them. But in all of those situations, when I look back, it was because I did not feel great. I wasn't having my best day, and I was trying to pretend like everything was fine. And so I was not connected to my experience, and therefore I could not be connected to others. We have to remember this, that our ability to connect and feel connection from other people is directly linked to our ability to feel present and connected to ourselves, which means that you don't even need to start out with a full community of friends and a partner and family that are so supportive to do this work and to heal, because you can learn to connect with yourself, and this will over time expand your capacity. Now, those are the practices that you can start doing for yourself and with yourself. When we start to look towards like how do we get support and connection from other people in a more healthy way. So let's say you do have a partner or a friend or a family member that you can reach out to when you're struggling and who are at some level available to support you. We need to start to learn to communicate the need. And again, all of these, not again, but these conversations that I'm going to suggest here are conversations to have outside of the PMDD window, because in those moments, our nervous system is so dysregulated that it's really near impossible for us to have a conversation with someone else that's going to like clearly connect the dots for them, especially because they often are also being dysregulated, right? Because you are impacting one another. And so if they're not able to hold that regulatory space, or that's something that you're practicing together, having these conversations outside of the window, and then maybe even having like, a safe word or a keyword or something to help, kind of bring each other back to this agreement that you've made, or to remind each other of the intention when you're in the moment, can be helpful. But one of the things that happens so often when we're in the middle of a PMDD flare up, we often get really stuck in our heads, right? So we're picking these fights and we're having these arguments about things that are really practical and like feel like this is just like a logistical issue, right? It's like we're fighting over chores, or we're fighting over a money thing, or we're fighting over a schedule thing. And so this triggers, because we present it as like a tangible physical problem, it also triggers others often to try to fix it, right? They're trying to fix the problem and not addressing the emotion, right? Because that problem and the urgency attached to it isn't really the issue. Yes, it feels that big, but problem will feel so much smaller if the emotional need is addressed. So having a conversation outside of the PMDD window to say like, okay, those moments when I start to sound a little crazy and paranoid about something that you're kind of confused on why it's a big deal or why there's so much urgency, acknowledge that like you are also working on, I'm trying to raise my own awareness when that's happening and catch it and be like, oh, this is what I'm really asking for, is connection here. But I'm asking you as my support person to, if you see me in that pattern, to recognize that like I'm actually seeking emotional connection there and it's not really about the problem. So what can they do? They can do things like intervene in, or when there's a pause, say something like, okay, I acknowledge the concern. So like, okay, so you're really stressed out about getting these doctor's appointments scheduled. I know that we can figure out a solution together. Would it be helpful if we just like hugged it out for a minute? Or can we do a few breaths together? And you can even ask them to verbalize it as like a request for them. Like, okay, I feel like this is getting, like, I'm starting to feel a little bit stressed out. Can we breathe a few times before we solve this problem? Right? So it's trying to shift this dynamic of like trying to break you out of this thing that it is a logistical mental problem, that it's actually a connection problem. The other thing that I want us to be thinking about when we're talking to our partners is opening a conversation around their boundaries, right? Because so often we're so caught up in our experience of PMDD and the pain and the distress and the dysregulation that we're experiencing, we often can't see how they are equally dysregulated. Just because they maybe don't lash out in the same ways, they probably often shut down and push you away more than they're like fully engaging in a fight. But understanding that that is dysregulation as well. And so they may need space in that PMDD window as well, where they may not be able to be fully available all of the time. And that is okay. We don't need constant connection to be okay, right? And we can work on regulating ourselves when there is space to know that those thoughts in our head that say like, oh, there's something wrong here, or they're leaving, or they're rejecting me, like aren't necessarily true, right? But we want to consider their boundaries and give them space to voice those, and that it's safe for them to have boundaries as well. And a practical way that I did this with my husband was recognizing that like in those days where I most wanted support and just like someone to be with me was like when I was really depressed. But obviously, just like sitting with a depressed person is not like a great time, because depressed people don't want to do anything. Like I just wanted to like lay in bed, but I just like the thought of him like going out and hanging out with friends while I'm here curled up in bed, like depressed, like there was this sort of this feeling on my end of there was like a rupture in that connection, right? That there was some rejection there. And so I communicated to him that something that'd be really helpful and really tangible way that he could support me in those moments was before he went out, if we could put a timer for like 10 minutes and like if you could just cuddle me for 10 minutes. We don't have to talk. I don't need you to fix anything. I just need a little bit of connection and presence with you. And sometimes if it was really we were both kind of triggered but still looking for that connection, we would just lay back to back. Just having some like touch was super helpful. Um, but having it be on a timer was also really important as well, because that timer then was like, okay, we've agreed on this. This is the expectation when that timer goes off. We both, disconnect from that moment. But it now removes any question there of like, is this a rejection, right? It blocks that from my brain because I'm like, no, okay, the timer went off. I'm also not in my head of like, oh, maybe he wants to leave. Maybe he's like staying longer and maybe I should cut off this time because he wants to get out. Or maybe he's like, okay, how long do I have to sit here? So the timer makes it this little container and we both understand the agreement and it creates a lot of safety. And it also gave my husband and my partner like this opportunity to support me in a really concrete, tangible way that wasn't just like, I need emotional support. Like, what does that mean, right? But here's a tangible way to do that. And so we can start to find ways to ask people for this need and to have some co-regulation. But again, communicating what the need is, putting a boundary on it, and planning out like what are some things we want to test out this month and see if it works for both of us, and have it be an open dialogue is so valuable, because your nervous system also affects them, right? And so this is a conversation around how can we both get our needs met and how can we both support having a more secure and regulated relationship. Now, I also know that that is not always available, right? We don't always have support people who we can rely on or who are even open to the conversation and open to considering how they can participate in the process. And that's really the heart behind why I created Willow, the monthly virtual PMDD circle. It's a free community space. It's a call a month at this point. And it really is to create this touch point of like, especially if you don't have anyone else, but even if you do have other people, like the more community and support and network that you have and more touch points you have, the more spaces you have to practice holding that space, being in that space, asking for what you need, receiving from other people is so incredibly valuable and necessary. So that's what that group is all about. And I will put a link for you guys if you want to register and start to get the details of when those calls are, because I would love for you to show up. I'd love to be able to support you in that way and start to disrupt this story that isolation is the only option, because that is not true. There's space for community and connection, even if you're not at your best.